In this episode, we take a look at two custom puzzles with black and white designs instead of the usual colorful stickers. We also talk about how these puzzles were created and how they can be solved. If you're looking for puzzles that you've never seen before, this episode is for you. Welcome to Custom Cuber. These are Tri-Zebron cubes. I made these sticker mods by replacing the stickers of regular 3x3 cubes. This is what the original cube looks like. It has rough edges and it doesn't really turn well, but I preferred this over a sleeker base cube like this that has rounder corners. It was important to use boxy base cubes for these mods because I needed sharp corners that can house the triangular designs. I printed the design on glossy sticker paper and cut each square by hand. The design for this version is composed of small triangles that occupy 1/4 of the space of each square on the cube's face. Each square on the cube contains two adjacent triangles of the same color, and the rest of the space is left blank. While these blank black areas are supposed to be considered unstickered, I made them part of the printed stickers for two main reasons. One, it will keep the feel of the surface consistent, and two, it's simply easier to cut and fit square stickers. The small triangles are arranged in two bigger triangles that form a concentric pattern around a corner of the cube. The same pattern can be seen on the opposite corner. The small triangles also form a white strip that goes around the cube. This layout is very similar to the layouts of the four-color zebra cube by Antonio Rodriguez Perez and the Armageddon cube by Fabio Cozzarano, although both of these cubes use several different colors around the puzzles. The second version of this puzzle also uses the same layout, but this time I incorporated more small triangles and filled up the blank spaces. Some of the concentric triangles are formed with smaller triangles with the same shade of gray, but some are formed by alternating pairs of white and gray triangles. The use of just white and gray on the Tri-Zebron cubes makes solving these puzzles feel a little different than those other cubes, and we'll get to that in a bit. But if you're enjoying this video so far and would like to see more one-of-a-kind modifications, you can like, subscribe, and click the notification bell below to stay updated with new puzzles every week. Because the cubes only use white and gray, there's a lot of similar pieces on the two puzzles. For the first version of the design, there are only two kinds of edges. One has gray triangles, which you can find around a focal corner, while the other kind has white triangles, forming part of the white strip that goes around the cube. Most of the corners are also identical, containing two pairs of gray triangles and one pair of white ones. The only other kind of corner is found on opposite corners, showing three pairs of white triangles. Of course, the other version also has the same number of identical pieces since it follows the same layout. So while solving this puzzle and the other version seems more complicated than solving a regular 3x3 cube, having multiple identical pieces that can be interchanged actually makes solving them much easier. Don't get me wrong, some puzzles that have identical pieces are actually made more complicated by the risk of accidentally interchanging the pieces while solving. But it's just not the case for this design because the similarities exist all over the puzzles. It also doesn't mean that this is easier to solve than a regular 3x3 cube. Because of the lack of colors, the solver has to consider how the edges should be oriented, instead of just making colors go together. Lastly, the centers have to be oriented a certain way to fit the pattern, something that isn't really a concern in plain colored puzzles. Now it's time to scramble this. For me, the scrambled state of this cube looks pretty cool, mostly because I like seeing blank black areas mixed with the stickered parts. Now let's scramble this other version too. The scrambled state of this cube shows a weird mix of tangrams, and to be honest, it doesn't look that different from the solved state until you take a closer look to see that there isn't any consistent pattern. I will be posting videos of the full solve for both of these puzzles soon, so watch out for that. I also have another great puzzle for you on the left, or you can also click the playlist on the right to see more of my custom sticker mods. Thanks for watching this video and see you in the next one. You've probably seen the bump cube, more commonly known as the mirror cube, or the color block, which is a bump cube with colored faces. But let me present to you the anti-bump cube, a puzzle that instead of having differently sized pieces, has differently sized groups of colors. Welcome to today's episode of Custom Cuber. What makes a bump cube different from a regular one is its offset centers. Instead of being in the middle, the bump cube's centers are pushed closer to a certain corner. Because of this, the solver has to figure out which parts go together based on size and shape instead of colors. I wanted to do something that's kind of the reverse of that. In the anti-bump cube, the shapes of the cube's pieces, or cubies, remain the same. If we turn the faces, we can see that the base puzzle is just a regular black 3x3 cube. In this puzzle, it's the group of colors that represent the shape and size irregularities. We have different chunks of blocks represented by different colors. For example, this represents a 1x1x1 yellow block. This set of blue squares represents a group of 3 blocks placed beside each other, forming a 1x3 chunk. If we put these two puzzles side by side, we can see the similarities in the layout. This blue chunk is equivalent to this corner of the bump cube. This white edge, shown in a 1x2 chunk, is equivalent to this edge. We can also take a look at the bigger chunks. This mini 3x3 cube here is equivalent to this chunk. You might have noticed though that the shapes formed by the chunks of the colored blocks aren't really similar to the ones on the bump cube. For example, we won't see a part shaped like a perfect cube like this anywhere on the bump cube. I'll show you why in a bit. Before I go any further, I'd like to say thank you to the channel's subscribers. I really appreciate the support. But if you're new here and you like puzzles, I hope you'll consider subscribing too. It's just one click away, but it helps the channel get the content out there to more puzzle lovers like you. I post weekly videos of new and original puzzles here, but you can also find me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, where I share behind-the-scenes posts about the cubes I make. It would be so awesome to see you there, so check out the links in the description below. And with that, let's get back to today's new puzzle. The shapes in the anti-bump cube don't have the same size as those in the original bump cube, because in this puzzle, the movement of the centerpiece is standard. Take this face, for example. The centerpiece here is represented by the set of blue squares. If this were in the actual center of the cube, it would occupy the 4 squares here. But in the anti-bump cube, it's moved by 1 square to the right and 1 square to the top. If we take a look at another centerpiece, for example this orange one, we'll see the same offset amount. 1 square to the side, 1 square to the top. All the other centerpieces follow the same pattern. They're offset by 1 square on 2 axes. In the bump cube though, the offsets aren't standard. For example, this centerpiece is closer to the corner compared to this other one that's almost in the actual center of the puzzle. Because of the standard positioning of the components of the face designs, creating the anti-bump cube just required designing two faces that were repeated 3 times on adjacent sides. The design for this face is the same one used for these other two, and the same thing applies to this other face, which has copies of it on these two faces. As you may have noticed, this puzzle has a few uneven plastic edges, and some of the printed stickers are not in their best condition. That's because I used a budget cube as the base for this project, and this was actually one of the first cubes I modded, so it has experienced some wear and tear. For me, that's fine, mainly because I wanted to experiment with the design and how that affects the solve. I wasn't really building a cube for regular solving. Like my other projects, I used matte sticker paper with an inkjet printer and I cut the individual pieces by hand. Speaking of the solve, this puzzle uses the same principles used for regular 3x3 cubes, except for a few considerations. First, the centers must be oriented correctly. They have to face a certain way to make the edges match. Figuring out how the centers should be oriented is a matter of knowing that two key colors in the cube should be turned towards each other. For example, these 3 centers with small blue squares all have the blue parts converging towards this corner. For the opposite faces, it's the yellow parts of the centerpiece that converge into a corner. Aside from center orientation, some of the pieces are also identical, which can lead to parities if the solver accidentally interchanges these parts while solving. Now it's time to scramble this. Like the 6x6x6 spiral cube, which you can find on the top right of this video, the anti-bump cube just looks like a scrambled 6x6 when it's unsolved. So if you weren't aware of how the anti-bump cube looks like when it's solved, how would you figure out the pattern in this mess of colors? Thanks for checking out the anti-bump cube. This is one of the simpler mods that I've made, and I think there's a lot of other patterns that can be integrated into a simple 6x6 grid that's overlaid on a 3x3x3 cube. Do you think it's still interesting to explore the possibilities of this, or has this idea been overused? I hope to hear your thoughts in the comments below, and see you all next time. Force cubes are fun. They're great for practicing algorithms and they look cool when you have a set. But another way of having fun with these cubes is by using them for sticker mods, especially since they provide a more interesting blank slate compared to the usual black background. Let's talk about the groove cubes in this episode of Custom Cuber. While this is a completely functional cube, this sticker mod is more of an art piece than a puzzle. To be honest, I've never even tried scrambling these cubes because the very similar pieces might make them very difficult to solve. I call them groove cubes because of the color schemes I used. The 70s groove cube color scheme has red, yellow, and green, reminiscent of the natural colors we associate with the design trends of that decade. I used an orange force cube to match that palette. For the 80s groove cube, I went with 2 sets of colors. One set shows shades of pink and yellow, while the other set has shades of purple and blue, which are all based on the color scheme commonly associated with synthwave. I think the blue force cube goes with that palette well. But aside from being art pieces, of course, these cubes still have merit as puzzles. Let's talk about the patterns in these cubes. But before I go any further, I would like to thank those who have already subscribed to the channel. But if you're new here and you like puzzles, I hope you'll consider subscribing. It's just one click away, but it helps the channel get the content out there to more puzzle lovers like you. I post weekly videos of new and original puzzles here, but you can also find me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, where I share behind-the-scenes posts about the cubes I make. It would be so awesome to see you there, so check out the links in the description below. And with that, let's get back to today's new puzzle. Both cubes follow the same pattern of lines. There's this path that starts on this cube face and ends on the opposite face. The same path can be seen on the other three faces of the cube. There's also another path that's a little bit more complicated. So it starts here, goes on the next two faces, then moves in this squiggly path, then goes on to two more faces, and then ends here. There is another path identical to this that covers the rest of the cube. In the 80s version though, the two different kinds of paths are shown in different color schemes. The first one is shown in blue and purple, while the other one is shown in pink and yellow. Like I said earlier, I'm not too confident about scrambling this as it might be really difficult to solve it. As you can see, all of the centers are identical, so I wouldn't even know how to start orienting them. How about you though? Would you dare scramble this cube? Thanks for checking out the groove cubes. I have a few more force cubes I'd like to mod, including some translucent ones. What force cube sticker mods would you like to see next? I hope to hear your thoughts in the comments below and see you all next time.